Greetings and welcome. We are in Junior English, and our expectation now for the hour is to spend a bit of time with a really important writer for us in the American tradition named Sandra Cisneros. She is with us in our hymnal on page 158 and following. We're going to be looking at her classic text, Straw into Gold. And I also want to point out for your notes, if you haven't written it down, that there is what we call a subtitle or a second title. Notice it is the Metamorphoses of the Everyday. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What did we just say? You might want to first write that subtitle down, because it's going to be an important observation at level 2A, namely when we start thinking about messages or themes from this one. Metamorphoses. Now, they're going to help you out in your hymnal by giving you a picture on page 159 of a butterfly or a moth. Now, why would they show the picture of a moth in the term metamorphoses? Now, to morph is the etymological Greek root of to change or to evolve. That is to say, to grow. So let's write down really quickly that this is going to be a text about growing, evolving, moving forward, changing, if you will. Now, prior in our textbook were the readings from Benjamin Franklin's own autobiography, where he outlines the kind of life that he wants to live for himself at a pretty young age. We now are going to look at another autobiography, this one again by Sandra Cisneros. Two things about Cisneros before we begin our reading. One, you'll want to write these down. One, the first thing we want to say about Sandra Cisneros is that she grew up extremely poor, in poverty. She had nothing, absolutely nothing. Okay? She didn't grow up with lots of money. She didn't grow up so that when she went to school, she got to drive a brand new car to school. No, 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 no. This is a woman who as a child saw poverty not only in her life, but in everybody else's life around her. And that's the second thing we should say. She grew up in a community of poverty. So it wasn't like she grew up among wealthy people and she didn't have anything. Everybody she grew up around had absolutely nothing. Okay? So that's the first thing we want to say. She grows up in poverty, both herself as well as other people. Number two, and important, she grows up a Latina woman in a culture where she is told very early in her life who and what she must do and be, because she is a woman and because she is from Mexican culture and heritage. So she has to hear lots and lots of voices to her about what are the expectations for you because you are a girl, and then later a woman. So she has, for your notes, major challenges. Another word for that is obstacles. Obstacles. Challenges that she has to overcome. She names her autobiography then, Straw into Gold. Jot down what you think that means really quickly at level 1. What do you think it means to turn straw into gold? It is, by the way, a reference to an earlier story in mythology, in our storytelling. To take straw, which is, how much value is straw? Very little. And turn it into gold. Do you understand the observation that's being made before we even start reading? In other words, Cisneros is going to write about a time in her life when she took the challenges that were in her life and she turned them into something valuable. And she's going to write about it in her autobiography. Okay? A struggle, we might say. A struggle. Go ahead and now look with me on page 159 and read with me. Under background, do you see it where it says background? The term essay, we want to write that term down at 2B, our rhetorical language. Again, not what the text says, but how the text says it. We want to comment that this is an essay And it comes from the French word, meaning try. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, the origination of the word essay comes from a French word which means try, to try something. Historically described an explanatory piece of writing that lacked finish. Eventually, however, the essay lost its originally unfinished sense and became a polished form of writing. Here, Cisneros recounts part of her own growth from unfinished to accomplished writer. So let's write this down. Cisneros had to overcome a lot of obstacles to become a writer. We've already listed a couple. Poor, a woman, a Latino woman, living in a culture that says, you're not supposed to be a writer. You're supposed to be something else. And she has to say, no. So the challenge for her of coming through this will be now understood in the essay that we're about to read. Now, I will point out to you that this straw into gold, the metamorphosis of the everyday, is going to be a way she explains how she became what she is, which is similar then to Franklin's autobiography. So you might want to write down really quickly at 3A, where we're assigning similarities to other texts, that the easy one here for us is Franklin's autobiography, where he talks about, let me tell you about my life. Let me tell you about where I came from. Let me tell you about what I tried to accomplish. We're going to hear the same thing now with Cisneros. Now we're going to begin on page 159, and again, let me challenge you as readers who are evolving yourself. Can I say it? The metamorphosis of you as a reader will begin with your ability to follow the language as we read. Hey, can I say this? When you were 5 years old in kindergarten, you could sit and listen to somebody read to you. Right? We did this in kindergarten. What we're doing now is something far different. As we listen to the professional reader, we're going to follow along word for word. Again, as I was suggesting to you before, maybe following with that pen, following those words. Don't write in the book, but just follow along to see if you can stay up with the pacing of the reading itself. It will also help you to be able to concentrate. I'm on page 159 with you, Straw into Gold. This is the Sandra Cisneros piece. Let's go ahead now and follow it, and then we'll come back to make some final comments about the text.
Straw into Gold, The Metamorphosis of the Everyday, by Sandra Cisneros. When I was living in an artist colony in the south of France, some fellow Latin Americans who taught at the university in Aix-en-Provence invited me to share a home-cooked meal with them. I had been living abroad almost a year then on an NEA grant, subsisting mainly on French bread and lentils while in France, so that my money could last longer. So when the invitation to dinner arrived, I accepted without hesitation, especially since they had promised Mexican food. What I didn't realize when they made this invitation was that I was supposed to be involved in preparing this meal. I guess they assumed I knew how to cook Mexican food because I was Mexican. They wanted specifically tortillas, though I'd never made a tortilla in my life. It's true I had witnessed my mother rolling the little armies of dough into perfect circles, but my mother's family is from Guanajuato, provinciales, country folk. They only know how to make flour tortillas. My father's family, on the other hand, is Chilango, from Mexico City. We ate corn tortillas, but we didn't make them. Someone was sent to the corner tortilleria to buy some. I'd never seen anybody make corn tortillas, ever. Well, somehow my Latino hosts had gotten a hold of a packet of corn flour, and this is what they tossed my way with orders to produce tortillas. Así como sea. Any old way, they said, and went back to their cooking. Why did I feel like the woman in the fairy tale who was locked in a room and ordered to spin straw into gold? I had the same sick feeling when I was required to write my critical essay for my MFA exam, the only piece of non-creative writing necessary in order to get my graduate degree. How was I to start? There were rules involved here, unlike writing a poem or story, which I did intuitively. There was a step-by-step process needed, and I had better know it. I felt as if making tortillas, or writing a critical paper for that matter, were tasks so impossible, I wanted to break down into tears. Somehow, though, I managed to make those tortillas, crooked and burnt, but edible nonetheless. My hosts were absolutely ignorant when it came to Mexican food. They thought my tortillas were delicious. I'm glad my mama wasn't there. Thinking back and looking at that photograph documenting the three of us consuming those lopsided circles, I am amazed. Just as I am amazed I could finish my MFA exam. Lopsided and crooked, but finished all the same. Didn't think I could do it, but I did. I managed to do a lot of things in my life I didn't think I was capable of, and which many others didn't think me capable of either. Especially because I am a woman, a Latina, an only daughter in a family of 6 men. My father would have liked to have seen me married long ago. In our culture, men and women don't leave their father's house except by way of marriage. I crossed my father's threshold with nothing carrying me but my own 2 feet. A woman whom no one came for and no one chased away. To make matters worse, I had left before any of my 6 brothers had ventured away from home. I had broken a terrible taboo. Somehow, looking back at photos of myself as a child, I wonder if I was aware of having begun already my own quiet war. I like to think that somehow my family, my Mexicanness, my poverty, all had something to do with shaping me into a writer. I like to think my parents were preparing me all along for my life as an artist, even though they didn't know it. From my father, I inherited a love of wandering. He was born in Mexico City, but as a young man, he traveled into the U.S. vagabonding. He eventually was drafted and thus became a citizen. Some of the stories he has told about his first months in the U.S. with little or no English surface in my stories in The House on Mango Street, as well as others I have in mind to write in the future. From him I inherited a sappy heart. He still cries when he watches the Mexican soaps, especially if they deal with children who have forsaken their parents. My mother was born like me, in Chicago, but of Mexican descent. It would be her tough, streetwise voice that would haunt all my stories and poems. An amazing woman who loves to draw and read books and can sing an opera. A smart cookie. When I was a little girl who traveled to Mexico City so much, I thought my grandparents' house on La Fortuna number 12 was home. It was the only constant in our nomadic ramblings from one Chicago flat to another. The house on Destiny Street, number 12, in the Colonia Tepeyac, would be perhaps the only home I knew, and that nostalgia for a home would be a theme that would obsess me. My brothers also figured greatly in my art, especially the oldest two. I grew up in their shadows. Henry, the second oldest and my favorite, appears often in poems I have written, and in stories which at times only borrow his nickname, Kiki. He played a major role in my childhood. We were bunk bed mates. We were co-conspirators. We were pals. Until my oldest brother came back from studying in Mexico and left me, odd woman, out for always. What would my teachers say if they knew I was a writer? Who would have guessed it? I wasn't a very bright student. I didn't much like school because we moved so much, and I was always new and funny looking. In my 5th grade report card, I have nothing but an avalanche of C's and D's. But I don't remember being that stupid. I was good at art. and I read plenty of library books, and Kiki laughed at all my jokes. At home, I was fine, but at school, I never opened my mouth except when the teacher called on me. The first time I'd speak all day. When I think how I see myself, it would have to be at age 11. I know I'm 32 on the outside, but inside, I'm 11. I'm the girl in the picture with skinny arms and a crumpled shirt and crooked hair. I didn't like school because all they saw was the outside me. School was lots of rules and sitting with your hands folded and being very afraid all the time. I liked looking out the window and thinking. I liked staring at the girl across the way writing her name over and over again in red ink. I wondered why the boy with the dirty collar in front of me didn't have a mama who took better care of him. I think my mama and papa did the best they could to keep us warm and clean and never hungry. We had birthday and graduation parties and things like that, but there was another hunger that had to be fed. There was a hunger I didn't even have a name for. Was this when I began writing? In 1966, we moved into a house, a real one, our first real home. This meant we didn't have to change schools and be the new kids on the block every couple of years. We could make friends and not be afraid we'd have to say goodbye to them and start all over. My brothers and the flock of boys they brought home would become important characters eventually for my stories. Louis and his cousins. Meme Ortiz and his dog with two names, one in English and one in Spanish. My mother flourished in her own home. She took books out of the library and taught herself to garden, producing flowers so envied we had to put a lock on the gate to keep out the midnight flower thieves. My mother is still gardening to this day. This was the period in my life, that slippery age when you are both child and woman, and neither, I was to record in the house on Mango Street. I was still shy. I was a girl who couldn't come out of her shell. How was I to know I would be recording and documenting the women who sat their sadness on an elbow and stared out a window? It would be the city streets of Chicago I would later record, but from a child's eyes. I've done all kinds of things I didn't think I could do since then. I've gone to a prestigious university, studied with famous writers, and taken away an MFA degree. I've taught poetry in the schools in Illinois and Texas. I've gotten an NEA grant and run away with it as far as my courage would take me. I've seen the bleached and bitter mountains of the Peloponnesus. I've lived on a Greek island. I've been to Venice twice. In Rapallo, I met Ilona once and forever, and took her sad heart with me across the south of France and into Spain. I've lived in Yugoslavia. I've been to the famous Nice flower market behind the Opera House. I've lived in a village in the Pre-Alps and witnessed the daily parade of promenaders. I've moved since Europe to the strange and wonderful country of Texas, land of Polaroid blue skies and big bugs. I met a mayor with my last name. I met famous Chicana and Chicano artists and writers and políticos. Texas is another chapter in my life. It brought with it the Dobie Paisano Fellowship, a 6-month residency on a 265-acre ranch. But most important, Texas brought Mexico back to me. Sitting at my favorite people-watching spot, the snaky Woolworths counter across the street from the Alamo, I can't think of anything else I'd rather be than a writer. I've traveled and lectured from Cape Cod to San Francisco, to Spain, Yugoslavia, Greece, Mexico, France, Italy, and finally today, to Seguin, Texas.
Now let's go ahead and work a brief annotation of this text. It's a remarkable brief essay that in some ways is going to draw the picture of a life. Let's begin at level 1. If you had to say what this text is about in just a couple of lines, what would you say? Go ahead and write it down really quickly. What kinds of things would you say about an essay like this? Some would maybe say, this is an essay that outlines a writer's life, an artist's life. Some would say, this is an essay about coming to terms with what it means to grow up. Some would say this is an essay about going away and what? Coming back. Right? Okay. Let's talk through the essay itself and do a little bit of interpretation at level 2. Of course, if we go to 2B really quickly, this is easy for us, isn't it? So let's write this one down. At level 2B, we're simply working with this type of writing as an essay. It is an autobiographic essay. In other words, it tells about her life. She's writing about her life. We can jump to 3A really quickly when we are comparing to other texts and point out that the house on Mango Street, 3A, quickly you can write that one down at 3A. House on Mango Street is Cisneros' most famous single work, where she describes through the eyes of a child what it's like to live on the streets of Chicago. Safe place, unsafe place, what do you think? Dangerous, not so dangerous, see what we're saying, right? So she writes about a life